Hello and welcome. My name is Dan, and you're watching Dan Explains. It seems modern secular culture has been pushing the idea of what free will is further and further away from the freedom to make choices to you should be able to do whatever you feel like doing as long as no one gets hurt. That's not free will. Let me explain why. Movie, TV shows, music, video games, and even books, with every passing year, are pushing the idea that free will is the ability to give into whatever you desire to do at the time. What is free will really? The dictionary defines it as the power of acting without the constraint of necessity or fate, the ability to act at one's own discretion. I think the key word in there is discretion. These days, people seem to think using their discretion is a three-step process. Having a decision to make, having a feeling about that decision, and then acting on that feeling. And if no one gets hurt, they properly exercised their free will. Okay, so now that I've sufficiently stuffed and built up my straw man, let's get out a bat and knock the stuffing out of them. If you think about it, giving into an emotional desire doesn't increase your free will. I mean, most people should be able to deduce real free will is the ability to use your brain to make whichever decision in a given situation. So, right off the bat, you can see having an emotion about something makes it harder for the mind to overcome the desire to make a particular choice. How does actually picking that choice reduce your free will? This has a lot to do with how our brains are wired, or should I say, how our brains rewire themselves. Every time you make a decision, different pathways in your brain fire depending on what decision you made. Whenever a pathway fires in your brain, it gets strengthened and the other gets weakened. This weakening of one path and strengthening of another reveals itself as an emotional desire to make one decision over the other. It can actually get so strong it becomes instinctual. We literally make the choice without the thought entering our intellect, like a knee-jerk reaction. You can imagine it like a path in the woods that diverges. The way that gets taken the most often is obvious and usually much easier to take. As the other falls into disuse, it gets harder to see and to navigate as it becomes overgrown. The other path becomes easier as the soil gets packed down, preventing new underbrush growth, and making the path wider as well. Like a decision no longer bubbling up into the intellect, if you keep taking the same path over and over again, the other will become completely invisible. You walk on by without a second thought. I mean, don't get me wrong, this isn't always bad. Sometimes we have strong emotions about a decision because something is telling us it would be a bad decision to make. Like jumping out of an airplane to go skydiving for the first time. However, people who usually give in to desires become more and more impulsive because it also strengthens the pathways that make the emotions stronger and harder to resist. This is also how addictions form, which often harm more than just the addict. Which brings us around to why giving into these things, when not done prudently, can be bad. Speaking of prudes, specifically old prudes, people of the past may not have had a good idea of how the brain worked, but they did have a good idea of how free will worked. Before the corruption of the modern ideas of the mind, which has been going on for at least 500 years now, Talk about the frog in the pot of water, huh? Anyway, before the corruption of the modern ideas of the mind, people had what we'd call more prudish behavior. Now, this term is something we often view with a negative light. However, they had a slightly different idea of what kind of behavior was bad or sinful behavior. It didn't matter if the particular decision you made did direct damage to another person, if it did damage to your free will. Giving in literally makes you more like an animal and less like a human. They recognize that slippery slope. So it's the act of doing damage to your free will that they considered a sin. Not only because it could lead to you making poor decisions in the future, hurting other people, but because it made your behavior more animal-like. They actually used the word licentious for this sin, which today usually has a specifically sexual connotation. But modern culture has been slowly stripping the word of its meaning. This can be a two-way street too. I just mentioned the strong emotion that prevents you from jumping out of an airplane. It's not that you have a strong emotion of wanting to be in the airplane, you just have a strong emotion of not wanting to jump out of the airplane. That's obviously a good, life-preserving idea, not to jump out. But sometimes that default desire to not do something should be overridden. Not overriding it does damage to your free will. And just like jumping out of the plane, the more times you choose to override the emotion and do it, the easier it gets the next time. This idea hasn't been attacked nearly as much as the previous one, and the word we use to describe the sin that goes along with it is still used all the time: slothfulness. The examples of this would be like not wanting to get out of bed and go to work in the morning, or telling your children to go pound sand instead of helping with their schoolwork. Often, we have our guardian angel and the Holy Spirit trying to help us along. Think about the bad feeling you get when you give into a desire you shouldn't have, or the equally good feeling you get when you conquer the desire. The same goes for sloth as well, like the bad feeling you get when you look around at the huge mess you never bothered to clean up, or the good one you get when you stood up and did something because it was the right thing to do, even though you really didn't want to do it. These are all things you feel after the fact, but they are a sign of the free will destroying decisions being overcome and their pathways weakened. The net result of that is the decision making becomes easier. Your free will becomes easier to exercise. The younger you are, the more important this is, because your brain is still forming the pathways. Also, the older you get, the less flexible these pathways become. It becomes harder and harder to change them as you age. I mean, even if you're late to the game, try anyway. People who don't fight these emotions become slaves to them. They excuse their actions, or lack thereof, with the idea that it's not hurting anyone. Well, they're hurting themselves, and the road to hell is paved with excuses, where they can go and try to blame everyone else for their own wrong decisions that led them there, forever. If you like this video, please press the like button, subscribe to my channel, and ding the bell to get notified when I post new videos. Also, please support me on Patreon, link in the description. The more people who support me, the more time I can dedicate to making videos like this one. So, until the next time, have a great week.